Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Unlock 2024's Tech Talent Gold Rush, Insights from the DICE Tech Salary Report. Thank you for joining us today, and we're glad you're here. I'm Nick Kolakowski, Senior Editor at DICE, and I'm honored to be joined today by a wonderful panelist who I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, I'll go over a few housekeeping items. First, we are recording today's webinar, and we'll send you the recording via email within the next 24 hours. Feel free to share the recording with your colleagues, your team, or anyone else who you feel may benefit from the information presented today. We also anticipate having time to answer any questions near the end of the webinar. We invite you to submit any questions you have for the panelists throughout today's webinar using the webinar panel control. After the webinar, you'll receive an email with a short feedback survey. Your responses help us evaluate how helpful the content was and how we can improve the DICE webinars moving forward. We do read every single response, so thank you in advance for your feedback. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our panelist and just let him tell himself a little bit about himself. Art Zeile is President and CEO of DICE. So Art, for those of you who don't know, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, really appreciate it, Nick, and appreciate being here. I've been the President and CEO of DICE for approximately 6 years now. Prior to that, I was an Air Force officer, and then I started kind of pursuing multiple entrepreneurial kind of engagements. I started a company in video conferencing services in the early 1990s. I started a company that was associated with data centers across 21 locations in kind of the 2000 era. And then finally a company in cloud computing. And each one of those companies, because they're obviously technologically oriented, I was a customer of DICE. And so I was very excited when I was given the opportunity to join the company and a great team.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to have you here. So before we jump in, here's a quick look at the flow of today's webinar. We'll start out by looking at some critical data uncovered in our soon-to-be released tech salary report. Then we're going to move into a discussion on the state of tech hiring in 2024 and the opportunities that it holds for recruiters. Then after that, we'll spend some time at the end of the webinar answering questions you've submitted. Remember to submit any questions you have throughout the webinar using the webinar control panel. So let's start off by breaking down some of the key data from the salary report. First, tech salary growth slowed in 2023, but only slightly. A huge number of tech professionals are interested in potentially jumping to a new role, and slightly less than half are satisfied with their current compensation. So in short, there's a lot of opportunity out there for recruiters. There's also some additional data that we uncovered. Many tech professionals simply aren't getting the benefits that they want. The report shows that there is a significant gap between many of the benefits tech professionals are offered and those that they wish that they had. Recruiters making their pitch to candidates should consider things like tech professionals' interest in work-life balance and the benefits that align with that. So we'll dig into all of this with Art in just a second. So let's get to it. So Art, the first question is, looking ahead, what are your predictions for tech talent in 2024 and beyond? In essence, what key trends should recruiters be prepared for?
Well, I think it's going to be a more competitive environment. I think there's going to be a higher amount of demand for technology professionals in 2024. We did see a diminished demand in 2023, which I think is going to bounce back, quite frankly, after business confidence really re-engages. It's been a year where fundamentally most businesses have been waiting for a recession to happen. I think all the indicators are positive in the sense that the chances of recession have receded. I do think that there is an ongoing war for AI talent. We use AI generically as an umbrella term for about 15 different skill sets. But what we've seen inside of the data over the course of the last year is that there is a very strong demand for anybody that has those 15 skill sets. And I think that the fact that we are showing that compensation was flat year over year means that there is a dissatisfaction with the level of comp in an environment where, quite frankly, all technology professionals are, encountering higher inflation, just as we spoke about a little while ago.
Yeah, no, indeed. One of the things that we've discovered in our data gathering throughout the year is that at the very beginning of 2023, there was a huge spike in layoffs. You saw, Google, Meta, et cetera, were laying off tens of thousands of tech pros, but then is almost a very steep drop throughout the year in the number of layoffs and the companies committing those layoffs. So that by the end of the year, I believe the last time that I looked at the data, which was fairly recently, December was sort of the lowest of the year in terms of layoffs and companies laying off. So you're still seeing quite a bit of, I mean, economic drive, I guess, for want of a better term. There's companies out there that are anxious to hire tech professionals for virtually every single aspect of their business, whether it's software development, website building, AI, as you mentioned. So certainly a lot of the data seems to bear that out. So I mean, despite that strength, it's one thing that we found in our data was that as many as 25% of tech professionals are still concerned about upcoming layoffs. So it makes me wonder, how did the demand climate for tech professionals change in 2023, and then what does it look like for this coming year?
So, in my opinion, we did see this very large spike in the number of layoffs that took place at the end of 2022 and then the beginning of 2023, so roughly about a year ago. To your point, we've seen those number of layoffs diminish over the course of time. And we've also seen a decrease in demand. And that's evidenced by the number of tech job postings over the course of the year. So we started the year 2023 with roughly about 300,000 tech job postings for that month. It diminished to about 142,000 by the end of the year. Now, you should understand that there's always a seasonal low point for November and December each year because people just aren't hiring during the holidays. What does it mean for us? I personally think that a lot of companies entered 2023 and you saw that higher level of layoffs because there was a reprioritization of how to run businesses in the United States. There was an eagerness to facilitate growth in 2022, and I mean specifically revenue growth. And so a lot of companies hired, they hired very aggressively. In 2023, investors basically said, it's about profitability. Please make sure that your business model can make it through an intended or a possible recession, and so hunker down. And that's evidenced by that job openings trend. This year, I believe with the diminishing chance of a recession, we're going to see a bounce back in the number of tech job postings, the number of the demand overall, and therefore layoffs are going to be something that is kind of diminishing or in the same range that we would see in a typical year, let's say 2018, 2019, even pre the pandemic.
It's interesting what you were just saying, because in 2021, 2022, we had what people call the Great Resignation, where that company hiring was driving tech professionals everywhere to see if they could get a better chance somewhere else. And now you're starting to see some experts talk about 2023 as the year of sort of the big stay, where a lot of tech professionals are now equally passionate about sort of staying in place and working for their current companies. To that end, one of the pieces of data that I thought was really fascinating in the tech salary report was that 93% of employed tech professionals are interested in a relevant new opportunity. And that seems to conflict with the big stay, with this idea that people also kind of want to stay in place. And so I was wondering, how does that sort of reconcile? I mean, what are you predicting in terms of employee turnover in 2023? And I mean, are they staying or are they going, or what does the landscape look like?
I think that it is a very interesting dichotomy. And the bottom line is that we did see most technology workers in the United States, most technology professionals stay in 2023 because of that overarching cloud of, the possibility of a recession. They didn't want to be kind of the last one into a company and therefore possibly the first one out in a layoff. So that cautionary mindset, I think, pervaded the community. But nevertheless, the fact that compensation was flat, that inflation is up, meant that people would be looking if they found a relevant opportunity. I think the caveat is really relevant, and the word relevant. And so, in my opinion, a lot of the discussion is now about making sure that you're in a position that can advance your skill set. And so when I think about relevancy in terms of moving, it is partly to essentially improve your own compensation, but it's also about making sure that you have the right work-life balance or the right kind of work environment. And then finally, having an opportunity to advance your skill set.
Yeah, in terms of tech pros advancing that skill set. I mean, and you and I actually, we as part of the Tech Connects podcast that we just taped, we were actually talking about how people sort of equate tech professionals with the tech industry, but tech professionals are needed in virtually every single industry out there, whether it's aerospace, whether it's manufacturing, defense, what have you. Um, so as tech professionals are sort of exploring their opportunities in industries beyond tech, I'm just wondering, how do you see that as impacting talent demand and skill gaps? Like, how can a focus on skills-based hiring help recruiters navigate this landscape when you have almost, I guess, sort of a fracturing of tech pros in terms of all the opportunities they're considering across all these different industries across the economy?
Yeah, I would have to say that what is pronounced by the data that we're tracking is that last year we saw that overarching trend of lower tech postings over the course of the year. And that was because of the uncertainty that was in the economy. However, there are industries that are relatively recession proof or recession resistant. And we saw that they were the ones that were actually hiring the largest number of tech workers over the course of the year. The first category would be aerospace and defense. We had a fiscal year 2023 defense budget that was 10% larger than the previous year. What did that do? It meant that there were more projects that were awarded to military contractors, largely in aerospace and defense. And so an elevated number of tech job postings in that particular area. You could also see that show up in terms of the average salary for tech workers inside of aerospace and defense being one of the highest categories. The second category that's relatively recession resistant is business consulting. And there we saw a distinct trend where there were a lot of AI workers that were hired by business consultants like Accenture and Deloitte and Booz Allen Hamilton and McKinsey. And that's because a lot of companies, as they think about AI, want to experiment or prototype with these business consultants before they make a dramatic investment in their own company, in their own payroll. The other two categories, incidentally, of the top four that are recession resistant include healthcare and finance. And so we saw an elevated amount of people and openings move into those particular categories. Now you come back to the question of skills-based assessments and skills-based hiring. I think that's going to be a dominant trend for the future. I think not only are we going to be talking about hard skills, tech skills, and the types of tests and assessments that allow us to feel comfortable with the people that we're bringing on board, but also soft skills, because a lot of companies recognize that they're going to get the best performance, the most effective team environment if they bring on people that are very highly aligned to their values, their culture, their way of doing business.
Mhm. I mean, it sounds like it's intensely competitive, especially for the highly specialized talent, the AI researchers, the machine learning specialists, and so on. One thing that we found in the tech salary report when we were compiling the data was that there is a gap existing between many of the benefits that tech professionals want, whether it's everything from traditional benefits such as healthcare to sort of newer ones such as child and elder care, and those benefits actually offered by their companies. Another good example is, given the prevalence of remote and hybrid work, a majority of tech professionals want some kind of work from home stipend, whether that's for coffee or more ergonomic chair or what have you. However, at least in the case of those work from home stipends, only 19% of tech professionals actually receive one. Where do you think that discrepancy is coming from in terms of the gap between what tech professionals want and what they're getting from the companies? And then how should recruiting teams sort of acknowledge and then overcome that gap? Because it seems to be critical in terms of both hiring and retention in terms of tech talent.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my opinion, let's rebaseline and say that there are a number of different benefits that we assess over the course of our surveys, and actually over the course of a multitude of different reports that we release as DICE. The top three are always compensation, it's work flexibility, meaning the ability to work in a hybrid environment or remotely, and then also skills and the ability to advance your skill set. There are a number of different benefits that we look at. I personally think that the reason why we're seeing this gap is because in the tech world, for example, as a company like DICE, we have a lot of technology workers as part of our population. So we think tech all the time. We have our own stipend. We have a quarterly stipend because a big portion of our population needs that to essentially be effective. If you're a manufacturing company, however, and 90% of your people are on the facility floor, you're not necessarily thinking about the technology worker that is working from home. So I think that's the reason for the gap. I do think, however, that more and more as we see the evidence of a tight market, and the market has still remained tight as evidenced by the roughly 2% unemployment rate in the tech sector that we've seen all of 2023 and pretty much all of the last 10 years. As that environment is evidenced, I think you're going to see a bifurcation of these companies that are not all tech, so that they treat their tech workforce a little bit differently than they treat their larger population, let's say the manufacturing floor. And that's because the community has become accustomed to being able to work in this environment, and they believe that they're effective in this environment. A good example is that I sit on the board of a bank, and the bank has a policy where everybody's supposed to be inside of the office every day, except for the tech workforce. And the tech workforce is a small proportion of the bank, but they have allowed them the waiver, the exception to work from home, because they know that it's important to keep those folks motivated. I think that happens more and more in the future as the tech community says, this works for us, we've established it during COVID and beyond, and we expect it.
Yeah, no, it certainly seems to be guiding. I mean, when I talk to a lot of tech professionals as part of generating all of our content, certainly the opportunity for hybrid and remote work is a real differentiator. And one thing that we've found in repeated DICE surveys over the past couple of years is that you would sort of think that a lot of tech professionals will want to gravitate towards all remote work, but what's actually happening is that hybrid work is one of the huge drivers, because especially younger tech professionals really want the camaraderie and the mentorship and so on that come with being in the office for at least a few days a week, but then they also want the opportunities for deep work that you can get when, hopefully you have a minimum of distractions when you're working from home. Yeah.
Totally agree. I think that what we've found over the last several years is that people want what they want from their work-life balance. They either want a hybrid environment where they could come into the office several days a week, or they want full remote because it works for them and they're kind of used to it. I also think that there's another factor that everybody that is listening to this webinar should consider, and that is that technology workers also think about the time during the day that they're most effective. And some people might be most effective in the morning, some people might be most effective in the afternoon or the evening. So they don't necessarily want to be tied to a specific schedule within the day. Now that is also something that has to be considered with regard to stand-ups and agile practices. But in general, what is coming out of all these surveys is that they want flexibility in the way that they work, because they know that when they get into a deep flow state and they're actually doing their coding, they can be effective in the environment that they prefer.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting as well is that particularly senior tech professionals who we talk to know that their highly specialized skills give them a certain degree of leverage when it comes to negotiating with hiring managers, for example, for things like, a remote work stipend or a flexible schedule or things like that. One interesting thing about the salary report was that the skills that tended to translate into the highest compensation tended to be, as you were saying earlier, cutting edge. There was, your AI related skills and so on, but then there was also a deep tranche of data related skills that translated into really high pay. So for example, people who were very skilled in containerization, Docker, managing tech infrastructure and so on, all got, obviously the benefits of that highly specialized knowledge. Certainly, I mean, there's a lot of hype around it, but I mean, certainly in terms of AI and a lot of these cutting edge data initiatives, it's still very early days. I mean, within the last year alone, the amount that we've seen generative AI evolve and be integrated into companies' tech stacks is really surprising. But I mean, I'm just wondering, because you have such a top level view of the industry as a whole, I mean, how do you see sort of all of these skills evolving, like not just this year, but as recruiters are thinking towards stocking up on staff for the next 5 or 10 years? What do they need to be paying attention to in terms of evolving skills?
I have to say hello to Timothy. Maybe
Hello,
we should
Timothy.
introduce him and then I'll come back to
Should. Hi, Timothy. This is for everybody in our audience. Timothy is our other panelist. Timothy Landhuis is VP of Research at SAI. So
You got it.
hello, welcome. Do you want to just quickly give the audience just a little brief rundown, Timothy, on your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a vice president of research here at SIA,
Hmm.
staffing industry analyst. We are the global advisor on staffing and workforce solutions, with a big focus on temp staffing and direct hire, but also the larger ecosystem.
Great. So Art and I were just discussing the tech talent landscape overall. We were looking at the tech salary report, which obviously had how, everything sort of trended in 2023, and then sort of using that to give everyone in the audience a little bit of a view on how the market might evolve in 2024 and beyond. And so from your perspective, what key trends should recruiters be prepared for this year as they're looking ahead?
Yeah, well, hopefully a better market in staffing. 2023 was kind of a down market, but a lot of that was coming down from some peaks that were achieved during the pandemic boom. So I think maybe a better hiring environment, a more normal hiring environment to some extent. But then also a lot of exciting things on the technology front and sort of advancing technology to keep track of.
Mhm. Yeah, Art and I were actually just talking about generative AI. Art, you were.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, I was going to answer that as well. I'd love to answer it, Nick. When I think about our reports over the course of time, there are areas, there are skill sets that definitely pop, and they're always associated with a bigger theme. And when I say pop, I mean that you could see that the salaries, compensation in general associated with those positions are growing at an elevated rate. You can see that the unemployment associated with those skill sets are super low. You can see the number of tech job postings for those skill sets are growing. So those trends, in my opinion, over the course of the last 2 to 3 years have really resolved to 4 distinct areas. The first is cloud engineering. There's no question that more and more companies are moving their applications from their own data centers into the cloud. So there's been an elevated interest in cloud engineers, folks that know how to run applications on Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. Second big trend is associated with cybersecurity. There's no question that we live in a much more difficult, more threat-enhanced environment, and so that's required more cybersecurity expertise at every single level inside of the companies of the United States economy. The third is that trend that you just spoke to of data engineering, the use of data to essentially deliver better business decisions. And then the fourth one is the one that's really kind of on the horizon, but I think pretty well acknowledged now by the United States, at least executive level, which is artificial intelligence. There was a survey that was conducted, I think it was by CNBC a few weeks ago, that said across about 500 different CEOs, and they said that about 70% are very highly interested in investing in artificial intelligence. They know that there's going to be a watershed change in the way that we do business in every industry because we can take advantage of the AI tools that are now being released.
There was a McKinsey report from this summer that broke down how, at least they envisioned the AI market was going to evolve in terms of both companies' tech stacks and then how tech professionals did their work. And they optimistically predicted that there's could sort of be a minimal job loss associated with it. But what we're going to see is the adoption of, for example, no and low code tools is going to allow software engineers and other tech pros who interact with code to sort of hand off a certain portion of their lower level tasks to generative AI, which can code and then do a certain level of quality assurance, but then also free up some time so that, these tech professionals can then focus on more creative things such as feature ideation, and so on. And I think that certainly as recruiters are thinking about not just this year, but years to come, it seems like they should be sort of closely conversing with the tech professionals who are already as part of their teams, just to make sure that what they're hiring for and sort of what they're considering in terms of the nature of work, that they're going to be hiring the right people to fit the moment in terms of how things are going to evolve. As scary as that can be, because predictions obviously go wrong often.
I
Yeah,
totally agree.
yeah,
And in fact, I would say that the interesting thing about that study, study dispelled the notion that there'd be less technology workers over the course of time because AI would subsume their responsibilities. In fact, it said, lo and behold, the technology workforce of the United States is going to be the one, they're going to be the resources that implement AI for all these industries. And so they're very much needed for, I think the time horizon was through this decade, through the end of 2030. It was one of the dominant themes that you'd see a lot more software engineers in the workforce because of the need to implement AI across different business models.
yeah. I mean, the number of pundits who I've been talking to say that there is a lot of creative potential out there, where when recruiters are hiring, it's not just a matter of hiring tech professionals who have coding skills in certain languages or knowledge of certain tools or so on, but do they have soft skills? Can they work effectively with teams and so on? But then also, do they have kind of I guess, a creative project management perspective on things, for want of a better term, where they can ideate, as I was saying before, like kind of ideate creative ideas? Can they see how the strategy should evolve based on the current tech stack and so on? And this just isn't in tech. This is also in a variety of other industries as well. Timothy, before you jumped on, Art and I were talking about how um, one thing that we found in this report is that tech professionals are looking at opportunities in industries beyond tech. And for all of those other industries, we're also seeing an increase in what tech professionals are earning, for example, in aerospace or manufacturing or what have you. And I'm just wondering, I mean, from your perspective, in terms of all that, tech professionals migrating into other industries away from tech, how do you think that's going to impact talent demand and skill gaps? And how can sort of recruiters navigate that landscape, do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I love the AI topic, and maybe we can circle back to that later in our conversation. But as far as changing industries, I think that's a fascinating topic. Big tech, as we all know, they did overhire during the boom times, and so now there's a little bit of a retrenchment. There's kind of an excitement from other sectors to sort of grab onto some of that talent. And I think for recruiting teams, it's a great opportunity to do that. I think when recruiting teams can specialize a little bit in their subject matter, whether that's technologies like programming languages, or whether it's depth of knowledge about a certain vertical, whether it's manufacturing or healthcare, and helping people coming from more of a tech industry background to transfer into those other industries. I think that's a big opportunity. And I don't know if remote work has been discussed much, but we can certainly get into that as well. But with the trend, I'm based here in the Bay Area, which is a big tech mecca, and there's a constant stream of people moving to other parts of the country that are lower cost, and that's certainly an opportunity to get those people plugged in to different employers.
One thing that we actually did find in the salary report, which is interesting, is that salary levels and by implication demand within Silicon Valley and San Francisco and New York and some of the other traditional tech hubs remained relatively level, but the the salary increase year over year in up and coming tech hubs, like for example Houston, San Diego, and so on, actually went up measurably. Sometimes, in the cases of cities like Atlanta, like quite a bit. And so I'm wondering, I mean, a lot of these communities have spent years fostering a really robust tech community. You see all sorts of startup incubators, you see larger companies moving in and establishing tech infrastructure and so on. But I do wonder how much of it has to do with remote and hybrid work sort of freeing up the workforce to, I guess, spread the love around, so that you just don't have these major tech hubs in a few spaces, but the entire country, you have kind of a proliferation of tech hubs everywhere. I'm just wondering your thoughts of that in terms of like, I mean, is remote and hybrid work driving some of this?
Should I take this one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So I love your point about remote work and geography. I think this is a hot topic that's maybe not talked about enough in the recruiting world. But when the pandemic hit, it turned the world of work kind of upside down. And in our latest staffing company survey, it was roughly half of IT temp staffing workers were working remotely for their clients, and that's up from like 10% or something before the pandemic. So what's exciting about remote work is that for any given client, any given job, if that worker can be living anywhere, then your talent supply is so much larger than if you were trying to recruit locally. I think that's good for people in recruiting roles. And then, if you have your own recruiting company, honestly, this opens up your client base as well. Now potentially you can fill jobs around the country as well. So I think this remote work phenomenon is really of great strategic importance for anyone working in recruiting.
It definitely seems that and Art and I were talking about this before as well, where there's an advantage in for companies that might not have the funding to pay for, especially somebody who has very highly specialized skills. They might not be able to pay that Google level salary to some sort of AI researcher or somebody like that. But if they have a more kind of flexible arrangement with regard to schedule or so on, I feel like that, I could be wrong, but I feel like that would be as strong an attractor in many ways as salary or equity. I mean, there are other benefits as well that I feel that tech professionals would potentially gravitate towards, potentially in lieu of like a massive paycheck. Um,
Yeah, I would also kind of reiterate the idea that if I was trying to recruit a technology professional and I'm doing so in an industry outside of big tech or the software category, I would go out of my way to talk about what's called the tech stack. You gave an example of using Docker, which is a containerization technology, and it's a relatively new technology. I would go out of my way to say, we are using Docker. We're using these AI tool sets that are relatively novel or cutting edge, because that alone is something that would attract technology workers in general, in addition to the remote opportunity or work flexibility arrangements and compensation.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely when I speak to developers and engineers and so on, I mean, one of the things that does pull them into a particular company is, I mean, even just the ability to work with an LLM, a large language model that's used in AI development and so on, and like how many. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg just was talking about how I think they're spending $9 billion on NVIDIA chips in order to power their AI work. And obviously, most companies out there hiring tech professionals do not have $9 billion to play with when it comes to chips. But you can see how if you present sort of these opportunities to work with really interesting tools and so on, it's going to pull people into it. Especially people with the right skills. And yeah, no, that's a very exciting thing. Timothy, one thing that we were talking about before you jumped on was the idea of a lot of experts have been talking about this idea of the big stay, kind of the reversal of the great resignation, where people are more interested in staying at their companies. But what we found in the salary report is that 93% of employed tech professionals are interested in potential new opportunities. So we're really digging into that dichotomy in terms of employee turnover and so on in 2024. Do you think people are going to migrate, or do you think they're going to really want to stay in place?
Yeah, I think some of those high turnover rates during the Great Resignation have been coming down kind of
Hmm.
broadly across industries and across occupations. And we're getting to a more, hopefully a more normal job market than we've seen during the pandemic. So, I do think that those turnover rates are coming down with the softening of the labor market. But I think the tech survey has touched on something in that the tech worker of today feels quite empowered to take their career into their own hands and they're not afraid to move companies if they need to. And we can see the trends pointing in the same direction. With remote work, you're maybe not as tied in with your colleagues. The recruitment process is online as well, and so it's easier to switch from one company to another. And in the field that I work in, looking at temp staffing and IT staffing, a lot of people are choosing to work temporary and project jobs because this is not because they have to, but because they want to, because they can get paid the same or more working as a freelancer or an independent contractor, and they feel like they have more control. They're their own boss. So I threw out a number of things there, but yeah, I think more than ever, talent is willing to move to where it wants to move.
Yeah, I mean, it also, I feel that with freelancers, there's this impetus to keep one's skills up to date and to build out a portfolio and to have a really great GitHub repo that shows off all of your latest skills and apps and so on, so that the hiring managers and the recruiters out there are like kind of can fully vet your skills and so on. And it also seems like a really good opportunity for skills-based hiring, where, if you are a freelancer and you're out there and you've spent time even self-learning, whatever your tech of choice is, whether it's Python or JavaScript or generative AI or whatnot. I feel at least that recruiters and hiring managers are more amenable, where they're interested in degrees and formal certifications and so on, but they're really interested in seeing whether you have those skills, and they're willing to hire if you do, even if you don't necessarily have those other things out there. Is that what you're seeing? Is there more skills-based hiring kind of driving everything right now?
Yeah, I think there is. There is more skills-based hiring, and you might think, well, it's ethical reasons because we want to give everyone a chance, and we're not going to just privilege people that went to the top colleges. But beyond that, just for practical reasons, there's so much more data out there now. And in the old days, you used to just look for college degrees just to simplify the process. But now the technology is allowing you to search on so many dimensions. And like you said, with GitHub repositories, you can evaluate people's code. You can have them take a test using an online assessment technology. And so all this technology is not only available, but it's fairly easy to use. And when it comes to online marketplaces like Dice, you just have more variables at your fingertips to search from and screen from. So I think it might sound shocking that we're moving to skills-based hiring, but if you think about it from a practical lens, it's kind of a natural evolution.
Hmm. We've also seen, I mean, the biggest companies like the Apples and the IBMs and the Teslas and so on of the world have been really highlighting that, well, again, while they still care about degrees, I mean, they're very interested in people who just have the right skills. And I feel, and I could be wrong on this, but that there's sort of a trickle down effect in a certain way, that a company looks at what Tim Cook is doing or someone like that, and they say like, well, if the largest market cap company in the world is hiring iOS developers based purely on their skills, then maybe we should do the same thing. I wonder, because sometimes what the tech giants do, people kind of ascribe more power to kind of it than might necessarily be worthy. But certainly it seems
Yeah,
that like with the big
yeah,
tech
yeah,
companies are driving this.
yeah. They're trendsetters, right? And some of the large firms have the money to invest in newer talent acquisition technology. So I think it's an exciting time for people in recruitment roles because they have more tech products to choose from, so to speak. And for the savvy recruitment professional, you're able to show your managers and your boss how much value you can add by evaluating the tools that are out there and coming up with sort of a talent acquisition plan and exceeding your budget, exceeding your KPIs and metrics that you have.
Yeah.
So, hey, Nick, I was also going to say that I see skills-based assessment as a natural evolution of the different pathways to tech that have emerged over the last decade. If you think about it, nobody was talking about a coding academy 10 years ago. And now there are plenty of coding academies for people to essentially reskill themselves. There are ways to essentially do so online using Udemy, using Codecademy, using a company out of Lithuania called BitDegree. So there are a lot of different ways to now, create a career in technology. And I think that that has made the need for a bachelor's degree or some kind of a credential to be a lot less relevant.
It's interesting to me too, though, just in the sense of for so long, so many recruiters and hiring managers have relied, yeah, as Timothy was saying, on like kind of the degrees and the certifications and so on, especially if they don't have deep industry knowledge to help them navigate who to hire. And um, especially with 93% of tech professionals looking for these new opportunities out there, how can recruiters identify and target those right fit candidates amidst this vast pool of people who have all sorts of skills and all sorts of specializations and so on? I mean, what role? I imagine that there's a hefty sort of data analytics component to it almost, but I'm just interested in how that circle can be squared. I mean, how do you feel that they should proceed through it? Doesn't go to Art.
Okay. Well, so I think it is a very difficult environment, and there is a lot more data. To Timothy's point, you have to have some kind of a construct for working through all the data, and then having some way of truly assessing the skills. If a person has, a profile on GitHub, and you can look at their repositories, you have the capability to determine whether or not the code itself is, evidence of their proficiency in whatever their, language of choice is. Those are all things that come together that allow you to determine on a skills basis whether or not the candidate is a right fit. And then I would be remiss if I didn't, accentuate the point that it's also about soft skills. What we've found over the course of the last several years that teams work more effectively if the people have the same value set, the same kind of cultural understanding, they believe in the mission of the company. All those things also add up to a more productive work environment and a more productive person on the team.
And Timothy, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, Nick, what came to my mind is just kind of how the role of recruiter is evolving a little bit, because the more powerful the talent acquisition technology gets, the more sourcing that can be sort of automated and matched. Recruiters, may spend less time on the sourcing, and they may spend more time on kind of brokering the deals. So if you can identify candidates that are matched, then it's those higher level sort of human conversations to persuade people to come. Maybe you're recruiting for a smaller company that doesn't have sort of the brand recognition, so you need to reassure those candidates that they are coming to a high quality company. What kind of a trend that we're watching at SIA is kind of what we call staffing platforms, which is more of self-service, two-sided marketplace between jobs and candidates. And in this environment, the recruiter is becoming more of a problem solver and a coach. So, the analogy here is, say if you're buying a house in the old days, you would, call up the realtor and say, well, what's available? Now maybe you get on Zillow and you do a lot of research yourself and what's out there, but then you still consult with that realtor for, like legal considerations and some of those high level things that an expert can provide. So, I would say, for recruiters today, they need to keep an eye out on how the role is changing and how they can sort of add the most value given, changing technology.
Yeah, that human touch. Sorry.
I'd have to say, Nick, to jump in here, that it's kind of interesting what Timothy just described is our exact kind of scenario at DICE. In talking to our tech recruiters internally, we reach out to anywhere between 100 and 120 different prospects to build a portfolio of 5 candidates that are interested, and then hand that to the hiring manager. But in many cases, the discussion comes back to that question of relevancy. We're trying to explain why the opportunity is relevant for them. And there's a lot of coaching, mentorship, all those things that Timothy just described. I think that that is a big, big part of the technology recruiter persona and role that's required.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it all comes down, I mean, that human interaction, that human touch, I mean, is ultimately key. Everyone in the audience, if you have questions, please shoot them to us. We will definitely answer them. And in the meantime, the first question that actually popped through from the audience is, for recruiters outside the tech world, it feels like we're playing catch up a bit. What can we do to make job postings and company culture more attractive to tech professionals? Timothy, do you want to take a swing at that one?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what they mean by outside of tech.
I imagine
guess,
in other industries.
yeah, just working in other industries. Yeah, well, it's interesting. At SIA, we cover, all types of recruiting, so not just tech, and healthcare has been a booming space, whether it was travel nurses during the pandemic or whatever. And what was kind of inspiring is that there's a saying in healthcare that, healthcare is like 10 years behind the private sector because of kind of how bureaucratic it was. Well, healthcare kind of leapfrogged. They during the pandemic, kind of necessity is the mother of invention. New York City needed 2,000 nurses, and next week they rolled out tech solutions to get people there. And so we've seen enormous investments in technology in the healthcare space, whether it's chatbots and all sorts of mobile technologies. And so I would say, if you're in an industry where you haven't been using as much talent acquisition technology, or even leveraging job advertising services, you can catch up, and you can catch up quickly.
How do you feel about it, Art?
Well, I think that this is a really important question for the future, because I do see a lot more technology projects across the full span of all industries in the United States. And as I said, I think there's a coming wave of AI implementation across all industries. It's not going to be just the software vertical or the software industry that's going to embrace AI. It's going to be everyone. And so when I think about what it takes to attract technology workers, I think that there are kind of 3 main elements. The first is you expose your tech stack. You talk about which programming language you're using, what your code pipeline technology looks like, the AI tool set that you are working on, because technologists get excited about learning something new and something relevant for the future. The second is exposing information about your culture. What's your company brand all about? What is it that the company is really passionate about and their place in society? And the third is kind of the relevancy of the project that they will be working on itself. What people don't really know or understand inside of the technology, or coming from outside of the technology vertical, is that a lot of projects never see the light of day. And actually, one of the benefits of working for a healthcare company or a finance company or somebody that's outside of the tech world is that you're probably working on a project that is absolutely mission critical to that company, and 99.9% of the time, it's actually going to be released, as opposed to, quote unquote, the moonshot projects that are inside of, let's say, a lot of Silicon Valley companies. So I think those 3 principles are really important if you're coming from outside of the tech world, is to really shine a spotlight on all 3.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a company killing some cutting edge thing that could potentially dictate their strategy for the next 5 or 10 years. Another question just popped in, and it's, for roles within the government as a government contractor, is it difficult at times to meet the salary requirements for candidates, but there is no option to provide flexibility in terms of working hours? What do you guys think would be enticing to a candidate when you're limited in terms of how flexible you can be? with hours and things like that. This particular audience member says, we offer a very generous professional development fund for each member of $5,000, which is a great benefit when you consider in the salary report, for example, one of the big data points is that tech professionals absolutely love training. They love training and education. The more free training and education they can get, the better. But I think the core of this question is really fascinating. I mean, when you don't have flexibility, I mean, how can you still entice a candidate in a competitive environment?
Well, I'll answer that first or take a crack at it. And I would definitely talk about the training benefit, because that is relative to what I've heard and anecdotally we've seen in conversations with other companies, our clients at DICE, that's a meaningful amount of training budget per person per year. I would also accentuate all the other benefits. If you looked at our tech salary report, we look at about 15 different benefits, and I would literally start talking about the fact that you have a very fulsome number of benefits across all categories. It might not be the case that you have flexibility in the office arrangements or office hours, but I would accentuate everything else.
That works.
Yeah, I mean, my quick answer to if the hours are rigid, you know, it might be something like with childcare or dependent care benefits. You know, certainly during the pandemic, that was highlighted, and that's often what keeps people from working, you know, full time versus part time.
Have you seen in terms of benefits like that? I mean, has there been sort of a growing desire for them? I mean, through the pandemic, or has it remained kind of relatively stable? Like now that, because the offices are opening up again, people are shifting from a remote to a hybrid work status. Has that changed from what you've seen, like how people are, like what benefits they want and kind of how they're approaching all of that?
Well, I mean, I
Right.
love the, yeah, I love the you know, the tech salary report and the detailed data on benefits. So, you know, that'll be exciting to see when that comes out in a couple of days. I mean, I do think that there's sort of like a inflation in the benefits. They keep coming up with more benefits, and so that's a good thing for workers. I do think things like parental leave are becoming more common. There's certain benefits that maybe they have in Europe and other countries that are slowly making their way over to the U.S. So you know, that is a strategy for recruiting, is to put yourself more on the leading edge rather than a follower when it comes to innovative benefits.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. Another audience question that just popped in. Offshore versus onshore. What percentage of the IT market is good with offshore? And I assume this means that as people are hiring, how are they sort of balancing out that mix between, you know, hiring people maybe even within the community versus contracting out to, you know, as Art was saying earlier, you know, even teams in other countries to help build software and so on. Either whoever wants to.
Timothy, you want to
Take
take a crack at that? I don't know the exact percentages or any kind of even a range of those companies that are accepting the offshore model. I will tell you that in my opinion, from our discussions with clients, there is kind of a binary condition. They either like it and they embrace it, or they don't. I find very few that are tiptoeing in one direction or the other. They have firm policies largely dictated by the CTO or by some executive within maybe the CEO or the COO of the company that says that this team is going to be working in the same time zone and it's going to be within these you know, array of places. But going offshore triggers a whole bunch of different obligations, like from a payroll perspective, from taxation, from a whole bunch of just different kind of choices and responsibilities. And so you're not halfway in, you're all in. That's the way I would describe what we've encountered.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure if the question was asking more about, you know, offshore recruiting versus or just in general offshoring. I think the global offshoring to low-cost countries is something that's not going away. That's my opinion. We do some market research on what we call the freelance talent platform market. So this is companies like Upwork and Fiverr, where people are doing smaller projects. And the data was very eye-opening. There's literally sort of millions of workers in India, Asia, Eastern Europe that are doing projects paid for in more high-cost countries like the U.S. And so, I think that dynamic is going to continue.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So thank you both for joining us today and providing us with obviously tons of thoughtful insights and tactical suggestions. I hope everybody who's watching live and on demand learned at least one thing, although given the sheer density of this conversation, I imagine, there's probably tons of things you could take away from this conversation, and found everything that we talked about helpful throughout the coming year. As a reminder to everyone, we'll be sending a recording of this webinar via email in the next 24 hours, and we invite you to share that, obviously, with your team and your colleagues. Before you receive the recording, you'll see an email come across shortly after the webinar ends with a link to a feedback survey. Again, we appreciate any and all feedback you share with us and read every comment with the intention of constantly improving the content that we share in these DICE webinars. It's very quick, it's just 2 minutes, and thank you in advance. And don't forget to check out the 2024 DICE Tech Salary Report, which is launching on Tuesday, January 30th. As we also talked about in this conversation, we covered all sorts of things, including salary trends across location, job title, experience level, industry, and more. We also discussed tech professional compensation satisfaction and cover the benefits of working for tech professionals. So hopefully you can use all of that and more to inform how you recruit this year. So thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Timothy, and thank you, Art.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
See you.